Have you ever wanted to know what the key issues are on wholesale deals? You ever wondered what documents you need to do a wholesale deal? Have you ever wanted to know what the heck these documents need to do and say? Stay tuned for the answers to these questions and many more. Hi, I'm William Dolan, and this is Esquire Advice, where we explain complicated and lucrative real estate and business topics. Remember, we are not forming a lawyer-client relationship by way of this channel. Always consult your local attorney before taking any action. With that said, grab a pencil and a piece of paper and get ready to learn. Welcome to our episode on real estate wholesaling. Before we get started, please kindly hit those like and subscribe buttons so we can keep bringing you valuable and profitable content. Okay, so wholesaling is complicated and lots of important nuances get lost when I hear investors teaching wholesaling to other investors. All right, but first, let's start with describing what a wholesale transaction is. At a high level, you find a good rental or flip property and enter into an agreement of sale to purchase that property. However, instead of closing and taking ownership of the property, you sell your rights under the agreement of sale to someone else, and that other person closes and takes ownership of the property. In this arrangement, we're going to refer to the seller as A, the wholesaler as B, the investor as C, and the end buyer, if there is one, as D. We're going to tackle this topic key concept style. Our first key concept is that the wholesaler should always use an LLC and not enter into any agreements in his or her individual name. I see this all the time, especially because a lot of people wholesaling are doing it because they do not have the capital to do flips or buy rental properties. However, forming an LLC only costs a few $100s and not thousands of dollars. So the protections you get are well worth it. The next key concept is that there are two key pieces of documentation needed for a wholesale deal. The first is the agreement of sale that the wholesaler will enter into as the buyer with a seller. This is the A to B contract, we will call it. The second document is an assignment agreement that the wholesaler will enter into with the investor, where the wholesaler assigns its interests as the buyer in the agreement of sale to the investor. This is the B to C contract. Now, let's sit on this one for a minute because so many investors get all mixed up on this. So when you are B, the wholesaler, and you want to sell your deal to C, you are not going to enter into another agreement of sale with C. That would be a double close deal. On a wholesale deal, B is going to sell B's rights to C to step into B's shoes and for C to fulfill B's obligations under the agreement of sale with A. Let's use an example. Let's say that the A to B contract, the agreement of sale, is for $50,000 and B wants to make a $20,000 profit. Remember, B is our wholesaler. B is not going to enter into a new agreement of sale with C for $70,000. Instead, B is going to enter into an assignment agreement with C where C agrees to pay B $20,000 for the right to buy the property from A for $50,000 pursuant to and in accordance with that agreement of sale. Now, there are several key provisions that you want to include in this agreement of sale. You want the right to assign B's rights under the agreement of sale without the consent of the seller. Many of the agreement of sale forms used by the local realtor groups require that the seller must provide its prior written consent for the buyer to assign its rights. You do not want this restriction because what if the seller starts asking a lot of uncomfortable questions or flat out says no? B should want also a limitation of liability provision. Perhaps B's liability is limited to something like $500 or the amount of B's deposit, which is generally a pretty low amount. However, please note that you have to be careful about this. You do not want to have a standard provision in your agreement of sale that limits your liability in the agreement to your deposit if there is any chance ever that you may not use a deposit because the agreement may not be enforceable in that situation. I will spare you the legal intricacies since it's easy enough to structure around this issue, but you do not want a situation where you get a great deal, the seller realizes that he or she could have gotten tens of thousands of dollars more from another buyer and starts looking for a way out of the agreement of sale. It happens. Trust me, I see it all the time. Attorney's fees provision in favor of the buyer, or if you want to make it a bit fairer, for the non-breaching party is another good provision to have in your agreement of sale. This will give the agreement a little teeth in the event the seller starts getting cold feet. Think of the situation where the seller consults an attorney. If there is no attorney's fees provision, the discussion will go something like this. Do we really think this wholesaler is going to pay $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees to enforce this agreement? However, with an attorney's fees provision, the seller's attorney will know that if the seller loses, the seller will have to pay the wholesalers $5,000 to $10,000 in attorney's fees, in addition to losing the lawsuit. This changes the dynamics considerably in favor of B or C, depending on who is trying to enforce the agreement. Risk of loss is another provision that should be in all agreements of sale. At common law, once the buyer entered into an agreement of sale with the seller, the risk of loss to the property shifted from the seller to the buyer, even though they had not closed yet. That means that if the property burned down the day after the agreement of sale was signed, the buyer still had to pay the full purchase price, even though the property is now worth a whole lot less. The risk of loss provision keeps the risk of loss to the property on the seller until closing. You need to think about contingencies also. Do you want inspection contingencies? We're talking about home inspections, pest inspections, wells, septic, stucco, whatever the case may be for this particular property. And also, do you want a financing contingency? For those of you that do not know, inspection contingencies give the buyer the opportunity to cancel under whatever circumstances are described in the agreement of sale. The agreement of sale that I use for investors lets the buyer cancel for any reason in the inspection period. However, some of the local realtor group forms are not nearly that flexible. A financing contingency generally allows a buyer to cancel if the buyer cannot be approved for financing within a certain period of time. An allocations and prorations provision is also important. Who is going to pay the realty transfer taxes? Are the buyer and seller splitting them? Is the buyer paying for them? Is the seller paying for them? My experience is that oftentimes the wholesaler will tell the seller, I'm going to purchase the property for something like $50,000, and $50,000 is what you should expect to receive at closing. However, you need to be careful if you make those kind of commitments, because what if there is another mortgage on the property that you do not know about? What about delinquent property taxes? How about local fines, vacancy fees, fines for the grass being too high, trash in the yard, and all those sorts of things? What if there's municipal water and or sewer? What if there are delinquent charges there? What about condo fees? I had a deal one time where the seller was behind $11,000 in condo association fees. I've seen local fines and assessments for over $10,000 on a property on several occasions. Of course, delinquent property taxes can be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. Be sure that your agreement of sale does not back you into a corner, and as well be sure that what you're telling the seller doesn't back you into the corner, even if the agreement of sale doesn't. So how do you do that? Discuss your agreement of sale that you're using with your lawyer. Okay, so the next provision that you want to think about are the survival or termination of representations. If you're on the buyer side, you want the seller's representations to survive closing. If you're on the seller side, you do not want your representations to survive closing. All right, some investors want to split settlement statements also. That is one settlement statement for the buyer that only has the buyer's information on it, and a separate settlement statement for the seller that only has the seller's information on it. Buyers sometimes want this because they do not want to highlight the wholesale fee to the seller. I would recommend that if you want to use a structure like this, that you include a provision in the agreement of sale that instructs the settlement agent to do it this way, so your settlement agent has no discretion in the matter. I would also include a representation that you are an investor, you're in it to make money, and that you might assign the agreement of sale or resell the property, in either case for a profit. This may not be legally necessary, but helps provide a little additional cover for you. Finally, I would include a provision that once the agreement of sale is assigned, the buyer wholesaler is released from liability under the agreement of sale. Otherwise, the wholesaler remains liable along with C, the investor. Okay, let's shift gears to the assignment agreement provisions. Aside from the general contracting law provisions, I would have a provision that attaches the agreement of sale being assigned as an exhibit so it is abundantly clear what is being assigned. If you are the wholesaler, I would recommend a limitation of liability provision and an indemnity provision from the buyer assignee to you. That's C if you're keeping track, the investor. If you are the buyer, or in our case C, the investor, you do not want either of these provisions. Another note is that institutional sellers generally will not allow a buyer to assign the agreement of sale under any circumstances. When I say institutional seller, I mean HUD, the VA, and many banks. Therefore, it is hard to wholesale an REO deal. Financing is the next issue. Financing can be a problem for many investors on these types of wholesale deals. And this is mainly because there are a lot of lenders out there that will not finance any part of the assignment fee. If the assignment fee is $1,000 or $2,000, that may not be a big issue. But if the assignment fee is substantial, that could kill the deal. I've seen many wholesale deals die late in the process because either C did not fully appreciate that it was a wholesale deal or never discussed with its lender whether the lender would finance the assignment fee. Having said that, the most frequent issue that I've seen kill wholesale deals is that the wholesaler does not adequately capture the renovations that need to be done to the property. So you really need to double down and make sure you've done a good job ascertaining the rehab budget. All right, so the next concept is income tax. Wholesaling is taxed as earned income, which has a higher effective tax rate than owning rental properties. For example, wholesaling income is subject to the Social Security and Medicare tax, which is about 15.3% in addition to federal, state, and local income tax. Therefore, you should discuss with your CPA whether you want to have your LLC taxed as an S corporation or not. There is also a possible regulatory issue with wholesaling because this activity is so similar to what a real estate agent does, and real estate agents are required to obtain a professional license. If done properly, wholesaling is okay in some jurisdictions, but if not done properly, it can cause a licensing violation. Also importantly, there are some jurisdictions where it's going to be a problem no matter how you do it. So check with your local attorney on this issue along with everything else that we discussed in this video. I hope you enjoyed this episode on real estate wholesaling. Again, kindly hit those like and subscribe buttons so we can keep bringing you valuable and profitable content. With that said, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.